Quincy, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. Now, you and I have talked a lot in the past. We've worked together on a few things, and you've been talking to me kind of offline about, I guess I was checking some notes. You talk about diversity in the workforce, diversity in the clinical trial participation area, but you're a little troubled by some of this conversation or where we're going. I mean, talk about some of your concerns right now.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and thank you for having me. It's always good to connect with you and to talk about these really important issues. So, I guess the part about participation. So, what we're seeing is that we understand we need to have more representation in our clinical trials in order for the data that's generated to be a lot more generalizable.
On the
Okay,
patient side, you're talking right now, right?
on the
Yeah,
patient side, right?
right.
And so we understand pretty clearly the biological imperative, right? We want to have different races, different genders, to the extent that we can include pregnant women or children or what have you. We want that because we want the data to give us the information we need to put the best therapies out there for the general public. But there's also a social imperative here that we don't really talk about as much. And so the social imperative is the notion that some people have access to clinical trials and other people don't. That's just as important as the biological imperative of having generalizable data. And so when we are able to connect socially, we are able to do what? Educate, not just educate on the clinical trial enterprise, but educate on the disease itself, right? So we're doing a study in diabetes. It's not just about going into the community and talking about, hey, I need you on a clinical trial in diabetes. It's about going into that community and saying, hey, let's talk about your diabetes, right? You are in a zip code that is very high in diabetes. Let's talk about your illness. Because at the end of the day, we're not just trying to get them in clinical trials. We're trying to get them healthier, right? We're trying to make communities healthier. So you got the biological imperative, you got the social imperative, and then you have sort of lastly, the justice imperative, right? And so the justice imperative, this notion that there's a central point that makes all the decisions about who we include and who we leave out. And that creates an injustice if we are saying, hey, this certain group of people can be included and this certain group of people cannot be included. We see that even within subgroups. And so let me give you an example of that. And this is probably another reason why I'm disturbed with the conversation. So this notion that in order for us to get, for example, Black participants, well, in order to get Black participants, we go to the most densely populated Black communities. Unfortunately, these communities that we focus on are the ones that have the least amount of education and the least amount of social economic resources. However, there are many Black communities that are very well educated and have very high social economic status. So this notion that the only Black participation that we need to focus on is the underserved, it kind of puts us in a situation where we're really violating that justice imperative. So I don't live in an underserved community, but I am diabetic. So people don't come into my community and ask me to be in a trial because I don't live in a underserved Black community.
They go by zip code rather than science or something, right?
There you go. Right. And so what we see that justice principle violated a lot, because I remember, Michael, and this was so disturbing when I heard this. I was talking about, well, I've never been approached in my community about being in a clinical trial. And there's several people in my community that have diabetes. And so what I was told, Michael, was, well, you don't represent the Black community. I was like, well, how so? So they
I'm laughing, but it's like,
yeah. So they start talking about how much education I have and I have resources. I'm like, hold a second, Mike, because I'm educated and I have resources. I don't represent the Black community. I'm like, how racist of a posture is that?
That's one of the dumber things I've heard in a while.
Right. So basically I can represent the Black community if I live in the projects, or it's like, come on now, we've got to do a better job of this. But this is part of the issue. Another part of the issue, and then we're going to get to the workforce in a second, I promise. Okay. The other part of the issue is sort of what I'm saying. So when we talk about barriers to minority participation, we talk about the barriers that are imposed by the potential research subjects. We don't talk about the barriers that we're imposing. So we say things like, oh, barriers, childcare, transportation, literacy levels. Now, mind you, Michael, we only talk about childcare, transportation, and literacy levels when we talk about minority communities. We don't talk about literacy levels of childcare or transportation when we talk about recruiting clinical trial subjects in general, only in the minority communities. So what we're doing is we're associating certain barriers with minority communities. But I'll tell you like this. If you don't have a car, then transportation is a barrier. It doesn't matter if you're black, white, blue, green, it doesn't matter. If you don't have a car, Michael, it's a barrier. It has nothing to do with your race. If you don't have childcare, it's a barrier. Doesn't matter what your race is. But I think too often we connect things to race that they really have nothing to do with race. Right? Childcare, transportation.
Right.
That's not that I don't see where that's specific to a race of people. If there's a community of people that don't have transportation, then we need to find a way to get them transportation. And it has nothing to do with them being black. The reason why they don't have transportation is not because they're black, because there are plenty of black people that have transportation. There are plenty of black people.
Most people in Manhattan don't have a car.
Exactly. So we need to figure
10
out
million people.
Yeah, are we going to do a subway? Are we going to put it in a place where people can get to it? And let's not even talk about the Appalachia part of the country where you can't find a clinic or a hospital anywhere with 50 or 60 miles. And you know what, Michael? They are close to 9% white. But we don't talk about them being underserved because they're not a minority populations.
I've got family on my mom's side in West Virginia. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. And so we have to talk about what we're talking about. Are the barriers socioeconomic? Are they transportation? Are they childcare? Or are the barriers race? Now, and I'm not saying that there aren't any racial barriers, because there are. Let's talk about some of those. There is a sense of mistrust in minority communities that is very well warranted.
Yeah. Unfortunately, yes.
Let's not confuse ourselves, and
it's not a conspiracy theory.
Let's not act like our history isn't our history, right? And so, to the extent where there's mistrust, well, the first thing that we have to do is acknowledge it. Hey, you don't trust us, the research community in general. And you know what, Michael? You shouldn't trust us, because we have not historically proven ourselves to be trustworthy. So, and I like the way Dr. Reuben Warren talks about this, who's a director of bioethics at Tuskegee. He talks about this all the time. He said, we don't need to get them to trust us so they can be in clinical trials. He says, we need to get them to trust us because we're trustworthy.
It's a trickle down. Yeah, right.
That's right. Yeah. It's a very simple concept, but how he puts it, I'm like, wow, we're overthinking this. If we prove ourselves to be trustworthy, people will trust us. And then then the part about the clinical trials, all that stuff will take care of itself.
Well, it's funny you say overthinking, because it sounds like what you're talking about throughout this conversation has been, a lot of it's well-intentioned. I won't get into motives, but we have been overthinking some of this, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely have, because, acknowledge our history, acknowledge why it is a barrier, and then say, hey, you don't trust us, but here, let me tell you why this is important. Okay. Then we educate on the connection between research and healthcare. Just educate on the connection. Now, I'm not even talking about the trial participation yet. The connection, how we develop discoveries, particularly that are cutting edge and new discoveries. There's this thing called a clinical trial, and this is how we do it. Now, if you don't participate, I understand why you wouldn't, because you don't trust us, but you have to also understand you are removing your voice from the conversation, and you're removing your seat from the table. I had a great conversation, Michael, with Fred Gray, who was the attorney that represented the families of the individuals that were in the study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male in Macon County, Alabama. And he said something I thought was just so powerful. He said, if the people that were in the syphilis study knew that we were not participating in research because of that, he said they would turn over in their grave. He said that study has done enough damage to the Black community. He said we have to quit letting it continue to keep us from doing what we need to do and making our people, meaning Black people, healthier. And every time we use that as an excuse to not do it, like I said, we're removing our seat from the table and our voice from the
Well, it
conversation.
sounds like what you're saying, that there's good reasons, there's understandable reasons for it, but these groups are hurting themselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, I
And
can
I don't
see
think
why.
and
I'd be
I don't think
skeptical
we're
too.
explaining. I don't think we're explaining that to them. We're just saying,
Interesting.
trust us, be in this study.
We're
Well,
better now. We've learned. We're really good now.
right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
So, all right, let's talk about the workforce, because obviously,
yeah,
I
sure.
mean, at least that, and I'd love to know what you think about this. The common sense thing is, I don't know if there's really studies that show this either way, but the common sense is, most people hear about trials either from friends or from a primary
Yeah.
care physician, and most people tend to like to, they like to hear from somebody that looks a little like them, that's somewhat like them. So, I mean, if you've got I'll be flip here, but if you got some crusty old white doctor who's 1950s kind of guy, and he's talking to a Latinx population, young people or something, they may not resonate. I mean, do you think? I mean, diversity in the workforce should happen for a lot of reasons, but do you think it would help with diversity in the patient population as well?
It could. It could. I don't necessarily think one has anything to do with the
Mhm.
other. And
Okay.
I'll just give you a personal example. When I got my COVID-19 vaccine, when I got my first dose, um, I had a Black nurse, and I sat down, and so she starts prepping me for the shot. Doesn't talk to me anything about the shot. Doesn't tell me that didn't tell me what emergency use was, didn't tell me anything about any potential side effects, nothing. She starts just giving me the shot. And I said, well, aren't you going to see if I have any questions? She said, if you had questions, then I would just expect you to ask me the questions. And I said, I said, you're assuming that I have a high enough literacy to read this form, or that I have enough health literacy to read this form. And so anyway, we went through all this. Anyway, it was just we did not discuss anything about the 19. She just went to proceed to give me the shot. All right, fast forward a few months to my second dose. So it was a white nurse. And I sit down, and she's not touching any of her cotton swabs, any of her doses. And she said, well, let me tell you a little bit about what's going on today. She starts explaining it to me. She tells me about tells me what EUA is. Now, of course, I'm in the industry, so I know what an EUA is. But I'm sitting here. I'm just kind of going through the drill, right? Let me see how this goes.
Kind of curious to see how she'd do it. Yeah.
See where this goes. And so she goes on and on, just tells me all the stuff about side effects, blah, 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 blah. And then what happens, and she points out the things on this thing. Anything happens, this is a number you can call, blah, 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 blah. And then before she touches any of the material, she said, before we do anything, I just need to know, are there any final questions about anything we went over? Now, we have two individuals, one Black, one white. What a patient wants is someone that's going to value them as a patient. The part about them being Black or white is cool, but at the end of the day, a patient wants somebody that's going to value them as a patient.
It's about the individual.
It's about the individual. They want somebody that listens. And there's this misconception that Black and Latino healthcare providers don't stereotype against their own race or ethnicity. That's completely false. I get stereotyped just as much from from a Black provider as I do a white provider.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that's not, that is not it's not an exact science. So at the end of the day, I think patients, potential research subjects want people that are going to value them, that are going to treat them with the respect and dignity of a potential human research subject. And I think that's the most important thing. Research studies are not going to just defaultly trust somebody because they look like them. And the flip side, they're not going to just defaultly not trust somebody because they don't look like them. It's all about the interaction. If I go in thinking then I'm not going to trust this person because they're white. The interaction hopefully will lead me to say, hey, this is somebody that values me.
Like if you were skeptical, the person you dealt with for the COVID shot would have probably won you over, so to speak.
Oh my gosh, she definitely won me over, because I sat down and I'm like, oh my gosh, here we go. Because I'm thinking about my first experience.
Right, let's go. Yeah.
Oh yeah, she won me over, and she didn't look at me. She didn't treat me as, well, this is one of her Black patients she's given this COVID-19 to. She said, this is a patient that I want to make sure that he knows everything he needs to know about what's getting ready to happen to him from a clinical perspective.
So let's talk about diversity. I'm sure, I don't know, put words in your mouth. I'm sure you're pro diversity in the clinical trial workforce, but it sounds like what you're saying is there's important, I'd like to talk about that. There's important reasons for that, but it's not necessarily connected to promoting diversity in the patient population.
Yeah.
Or less so.
It's not here. And I'll say this, and I don't know how this is going to be received.
Bring it on.
There doesn't need to be diversity in the workplace for diversity's sake. The reason why there needs to be diversity in the workforce is because there are a large number of very gifted, highly skilled clinical research professionals, and they are of all genders, races, sexual and gender identity, physical ability, and military status. I can go all the ways that we're different.
So again, we're back to the individual.
It goes back to the individual. This workforce, Michael, needs, if you don't hear anything else, this workforce needs skilled, compassionate professionals.
Period.
This group of skilled and passionate professionals comes in all, like my dad would say, it comes in all shapes and sizes, right?
Right.
And it does, but here's the thing, and this is what we have to be careful of. I want you to include me on your team, Michael, if you think I bring the skills and compassion and the approach that you need to advance excellence in clinical research. The last thing I want you to do is to hire me because I'm Black. That is killing the workforce.
It's not going to be good for anybody in the long run.
Nobody.
Right.
I don't even win if that's why you hired me.
Mm-hmm. Not ultimately, no, because you'll stumble on the job, or you're miscast, or whatever. You should be in another role or whatever. Yeah.
Hire me because I'm good,
or trainable or whatever. Yeah.
Trainable or coachable or whatever thing is.
Mm-hmm.
This is an opportunity for to get someone that's going to contribute really well and aligns well with what we're trying to do here. And this person has the skills to do it. Now, what I don't want you to hire me because I'm Black. Here's the flip side of that. I don't want you to not hire me because I'm Black. Right. If that makes sense.
And again, I know we keep saying it, but I don't want to sound naive, and I know this is, this can be a little Pollyanna-ish, and everybody's got their, a little bit of an issue here to some degree, but it's about the individual.
It's about the individual. And the thing about inclusion, we as a profession just have to do a better job of broadening our lens of excellence. And what I mean by that is I'm on the board of, I just got off the board of SOCRA, I'm on the board of AHARP, so I'm on a lot of national boards. Here's what we can't do. So Michael, let's say that you're also on this board. So we have Michael Kelsey. He is a thought leader in clinical research, a key opinion leader. He's a leader in our industry. It is such a great honor to have Michael on our board because he is a trendsetter and leader in our industry.
I love where this is going. Keep going. It's great. Right?
So we talk about your background, talk about your expertise, all the ways that you're going to make this board function at the highest level of excellence, right? And then I'm also on that board. So now when you introduce me, you say, look at how inclusive we are. We have Quincy Birdsong.
Right.
Well, hold a second. When you talk about Michael, he's changing the game. He's a leader, thought leader, opinion, blah, 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 blah. Look at his track record, blah, blah, blah. Now me, I have a similar Background is yours, right? We've accomplished a lot of the same things in clinical research.
Well, yours is better, but I get your point. Yeah. Yeah.
But when you talk about me being on your board, look at how inclusive we are.
Right. Right.
You some saying that, and Michael, this goes without saying, we have to quit doing that.
Right. I mean, a lot of people mean well when they do that. They
And
feel
do, and
positive
like,
about it,
look at
but
this.
it's a little condescending or something, or it's certainly not focusing on the individual. I mean,
that's right. You've just reduced my participation on the board as your value of diversity or your value of inclusion. Like, no,
right.
I'm on your board because I'm also a thought leader. So why are you not saying that about me? Why are you just saying that about, because the white person on the board, you don't even mention the fact that they're white. Right? You just mentioned that this is what to the table. But
we're sure lucky to have this white person on our board.
Right, that's right. Yeah. Well, yeah, that doesn't even come up. But when it's with someone that is, a racial or ethnic minority, then that's the thing that becomes the focus. And at the end of the day, what do we want, Michael? We want excellence in clinical research. And the excellence in clinical research, like I said, looks a lot of different ways. And we just have to be receptive to all the ways that excellence presents itself in our work.
For Quincy Birdsong, this has been quite an exciting conversation. I hope a galvanizing conversation. I've really enjoyed this, and you've helped me think of things in a different way. I think for the audience as well too. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a really eye-opening way to look at this. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Michael. We'll see you soon.